Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to what we'll call a special edition of the Inspire Life podcast, and more or less a meet and greet with a friend of mine, another very, very talented coach, and someone who is really just out there trying to help people understand what it is that they can do to things that are stopping them, specifically working with doubt. And his name is Boehnke. He is a life coach, local here in St. Paul, Minnesota, for those of you who are listening from the Twin Cities. And he is going to share a bit more about what it is that he does and how, he kind of differs from what I do as a health and wellness coach. So, Paul, thanks so much for taking the time out today to do this interview.
Hey, my pleasure, Michael. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So to start, can you just tell me a bit about, how and why you became a life coach?
Sure. Well, there's sort of really two bits to that story. I spent many years as a classical musician before I became a coach. And well, being an artist is about so much more than simply mastering the tools of one's art. It's really about sort of mastering yourself, uncovering your own hidden fears, motivations, habits, so that those things aren't in the way of the artistic expression. And that was really one of the most satisfying parts to me about being an artist. And it was also one of the more satisfying parts about helping my students as well, helping them uncover their own hidden fears, motivations, habits. And the second part of the story is that as a performer, I kind of needed to train my mind, my body, and my emotions so that they really work together in order to play music well. And they all really had to do their part and do it on cue, shall we say. So what I got good at was sort of getting my brain, my body, and emotions to do what I needed them to do when I needed them to do it. And then later in life, I realized there were still some messages in my head that sort of kept arguing for my limitations. There were certain places in my life I was stuck. My career was fine, but it's only seemed to go so far, or relationships only went so deep, that sort of thing. And all these messages in my head were really telling me all the reasons why I could not do all sorts of things. And eventually I decided to turn those mind training skills, if you will, that I learned as a performer to reprogramming those thoughts about self-doubt. And when I realized that it worked, I knew that I had the power to, well, not only change my life, but the lives of others as well. And so that's really when I decided to become a coach.
That's fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
yeah,
what I'm hearing is that you've had a lot of, both personal and also professional with people that you were working with, experience with this idea around what self-doubt is and how it can be such a hindrance to so many, and it shows up in so many different ways. So, I'm curious, if you could delve further, what are some of the main ways that self-doubt shows up in people's lives?
Yeah, you're right, Michael. It shows up in so many, many different ways. It's not just those little messages from that voice in our head, but, self-doubt can show up in our lives as hesitation, as procrastination. That's a really common one. Confusion, second guessing, criticizing, judgment, fear, even shows up as things like shyness or bravado, maybe needing outside validation, inflexibility. Maybe you're overly rational or overly emotional. Sometimes it shows up as impatience or constant apologizing, denial. The list can sort of go on and all the many different patterns that we learn growing up. Self-doubt can show up in all of them in one way or another. But at the root of virtually all the self-doubts that we experience is really a feeling that in one way or another, we're just not quite good enough. Self-doubt has a tendency to focus on our sense of self-worth. And it's just that it shows up in an amazingly wide range of ways.
That's powerful. And I thank you for sharing all of that. It sounds like, it really, as with a lot of other things in life, but sometimes the root of what's really going on can manifest in different ways. And that's why it's so important to really understand what is the root cause of why I'm maybe speaking out or not speaking or whatever it may be, that the way it's showing up, and something that you obviously are very good at helping people do. So, kind of building off of that, thinking about your work and people you've worked with, what are maybe the basic steps to reprogramming that voice in your head that's kind of telling you these messages that aren't serving?
Yeah. Well, the process is fairly straightforward and actually not all that complicated. There are basically four main steps. And the first step is to realize that these messages in our head, first of all, are just thoughts. They're not who we are. They are not reflective of our worth. They're just thoughts that we're having. And they're thoughts that we've had so often that they have become habits. And that's really just the first step, is to recognize that all these thoughts are simply habits. There's nothing else going on. There's not this outside force that has control over us, some evil force that we do battle with. It's just these habitual thoughts. So we can sort of lighten up on ourselves. And realizing that these are just thoughts, well, it creates a little bit of distance between who we are at our core and those thoughts. We realize we're not the same thing. The second step in this process is to look a little more deeply at those self-doubts and figure out what is the lie that actually is at the root of those messages. If there's something that doesn't feel good, that's really keeping you stuck in some way, that there's something not right about those messages. There's some lie that it's usually based on. And whether the lie has to do with our root fear, shall we say, or core shame in some cases. For instance, the root message that of all of my various self-doubts tends to come down to something like, Paul, you're not really quite acceptable the way you are. The way you think, the way you feel, people don't really want to know that. So best you just keep that hidden. That's kind of the core message for me. That's what sort of shows up and has a tendency to make me play it safe. But if we can get underneath and figure out what those lies are, that creates even more space between who we are and what those thoughts are. We realize not only are they just thoughts, but they're not even true. So it's easier for us to let go of them, and frankly, for them to let go of us. The third step really is to just create a new message that's going to fill in the gap that was created, fill in that little vacuum created by making that distance, and creating some sort of a thought that feels strong, that feels empowering to us, that really feels good when we say it or think it, and that has a definite amount of believability about it. If it's something that we just can't believe, it's not going to become a believable thought to us. So we create this new message. Often it helps to begin with the root lie underneath, and sort of what's at the bottom of that. How can we turn that around into a strength instead of a weakness? And then once you've got this strong, powerful message that you may have to refine a few times until you really get it where you want it to be, then the last step is really just practicing it. You just need to think it. We often don't think about thinking consciously, and that's kind of the problem. Our thoughts come unconsciously, all by themselves. Well, what a difference it would make is if the thoughts that we had were consciously chosen and ones that really supported and served us well. And so once you've created that thought that serves you well, you just consciously think it over and over and over, much like practicing musical instrument, or I know, Michael, you're a golfer, practicing that golf swing, so that just happens automatically. And pretty soon that thought becomes a habit. And a habit actually ends up being a belief. A belief really is just a thought that you keep thinking. Belief and truth are two different ideas. We can all probably think of things that people have believed that have had nothing to do with the truth. So a belief is just the thought you keep thinking. And so you keep thinking your thought long enough, it becomes your new belief, becomes almost who you are. And when that happens, that old self-doubt just evaporates like smoke. So that's basically the 4 steps. It's relatively easy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking your own personal experience and bringing that into the mix. And,
Yeah.
like Paul is saying, everyone, it really comes down to the messages that we are telling ourselves and what we believe and really, kind of affirming that to be. But like Paul is also saying, if we're unable to recognize that root, shame or belief or guilt, whatever it's coming from, it can be a challenge to get to that step. And that's something that Paul is really an expert at helping people do. That's why I partner with him. I refer people who are more suited to be working with Paul his way, because I know that he can help people get those results, especially when it comes to those messages. So, Paul, before we wrap up today, first and foremost, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this again. I want to ask, how can our listeners get in touch with you? And what's the best way that they can learn more about what it is that you do in your work?
Yeah, thank you. Well, probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is just through my website, which is my name, paulboehnke.com. I'm guessing maybe you can include that link or something with this video. And actually on that site, there's also a free video that you can watch, which covers these 4 steps that I just outlined. So you can sort of revisit them there in a little more deep way. And actually there's an opportunity that I can offer to your listeners here, Michael, between now and the end of August here, August 2021. I am offering single individual coaching sessions to anyone for whatever price they can afford, a minimum of $5. And I'm doing this for a number of reasons. One, I want to provide as much help to as many people as I can, and to do it in a way that is affordable really for anyone, so that this outer block of money isn't a block for them, isn't a stumbling block. And it helps me sort of get more hours that helps me get to my next level of certification as well, which I hope to achieve at the end of September. So it's kind of a mixed bag of opportunities for you and opportunities for me. And if you are interested in that, you can just shoot me an email or contact me again through my website at paulboehnke.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And, from my personal experience of knowing Paul and how he works with people and the results that he's able to help people see, I definitely recommend reaching out and taking advantage of that offer, because it's not going to be there forever. And I know that so many of our listeners would really value and get a lot of benefit from working with you. So, Paul, thank you again so much. It's been an honor, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael.